Imagine if the disease you fear most as you get older, whether that is Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, isn't actually a single disease at all.
Right, which is wild to think about.
I mean, just imagine if the diagnosis of, Alzheimer's is really just this giant umbrella label, and it's hiding 5 completely distinct conditions underneath it. And your doctor's generic advice is really only treating one of them.
It completely upends how we even think about aging and brain health. I mean, for decades now, the medical community has treated these neurodegenerative conditions as monolithic.
Like it's just one big thing.
Exactly. You get the diagnosis, you are put on a standard pathway, and, well, we just watch the decline.
But today we are taking a deep dive into a really groundbreaking 2026 paper from the journal Nature Aging that proves that one-size-fits-all approach is just fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, it's completely flawed.
The researchers took this massive stack of data electronic health records, or EHRs, from over 100,000 patients in the UK. And they didn't just look at their brains after they got sick.
Right, which is the usual way of doing things.
Exactly. Instead, they used advanced AI to track their medical histories for decades before they were ever diagnosed.
And, their findings give us a completely new map of human neurodegeneration. They uncovered 5 highly distinct, completely reproducible subtypes or clusters for both Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease.
So our mission for this deep dive today is to really unpack exactly how these 5 pathways work mechanically in your body. We are going to explore what this means for your own long-term risk management.
And why your genetics are absolutely not your destiny.
Yes. That is a huge part of this. And we'll look at how the future of preventing brain disease is incredibly personalized.
So I think we should probably start with the methodology.
Okay, let's unpack this methodology first. Because to understand the cure, we really have to understand the failure. The core problem in neurology has always been the catastrophic failure rate of clinical trials.
Oh, it's terrible. We constantly hear about some new Alzheimer's drug, right?
Okay.
And it sounds incredibly promising in the lab.
And then it just completely washes out in human testing.
Exactly. And this paper argues that happens because the patient pools are completely heterogeneous.
Wait, let's explain that word for everyone listening. Heterogeneous just means completely mixed up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Think about trying to cure a stomach ache with one pill. If you have 5 people with a stomach ache and, one has appendicitis, one has food poisoning, and one has an ulcer.
A single medication is not going to cure all of them.
Right. It might actually hurt some of them. So to fix this in neurology, the researchers realized they couldn't just look at a patient at age 75 when the memory slips start.
They had to look backward.
Way backward. They accessed prediagnostic electronic health records spanning an average of 18 to 35 years before a dementia or motor diagnosis was ever made.
Which is just a staggering amount of time. I mean, it's like reading the prequels of a massive movie franchise just to understand why the main character makes a certain choice in the finale.
That is a great way to put it.
Instead of starting the story at the neurologist's office, the AI read 30 years of seemingly unrelated doctor visits, like a prescription for a cough in 1995, a sprained ankle in 2004, maybe a blood pressure medication change in 2010.
And what's fascinating here is the specific technology they used to process that much life history. They utilized a transformer-based model.
Okay, if that term rings a bell for anyone listening, it's because it's the exact same underlying architecture that powers modern generative AI, like the chatbots everyone uses.
Exactly the same. But instead of training the AI to predict the next word in a sentence, they trained it on sequential clinical events.
Wait, so how does an AI actually read a doctor's visit? It doesn't read the messy handwritten notes, right?
No, it turns the data into mathematics. It takes decades of medical billing codes, diagnoses, pharmacy records, and it translates them into multidimensional vectors.
Vectors, like arrows in a grid.
It's sort of, yeah. It essentially maps the trajectory of your health as a mathematical shape. And once the AI plotted all 100,000 patient trajectories, they used an algorithm called k-means clustering.
Okay, let's break down k-means clustering, because we want to make sure every single mechanism is totally clear.
Right, so you can visualize this like looking at a massive galaxy of disorganized stars.
Just totally random stars everywhere.
Right, and the k-means algorithm naturally draws lines between stars that are moving in the exact same pattern, grouping them together into constellations. It finds the center of a cluster and pulls all the similar data points around it.
I have to push back on the data itself, though.
Yeah.
Are electronic health records really reliable enough to build a medical constellation?
It's a fair question.
Because, I mean, from my own experience, my medical file is just a messy pile of rushed doctor notes, weird billing codes, and administrative noise. How does an AI find a pristine biological signal in all that chaos?
And that is the exact skepticism many researchers had initially. Individual EHRs are notoriously noisy.
Yeah, they really are.
You might go to the doctor for a headache, and the billing code says migraine just to get the insurance to cover a scan.
Right. Happens all the time.
But the secret to overcoming that noise is the sheer, overwhelming scale of the data. The researchers used the UK's Clinical Practice Research Data Link, the CPRD, combined with the UK Biobank.
And when you have that much data, the errors kind of vanish.
Exactly. When you feed an AI the longitudinal data of over 100,000 patients spanning 35 years, the random administrative errors just cancel out. The true underlying clinical patterns emerge organically.
Because the AI wasn't programmed with human biases, it just clustered the data based on similarity.
Right. It didn't know what it was looking for, it just found what was there.
Okay, so let's do a really quick recap of what we just learned before we jump into the actual subtypes. For everyone listening, just keep this in mind. The researchers basically time traveled.
Yep, AI time travel.
They used a transformer AI to look at 35 years of random doctor visits, turn them into math, and used k-means clustering to find 5 specific patterns of how people get these brain diseases.
And the 5 distinct pathways it found are an absolute paradigm shift.
Let's get into the first major revelation, which fundamentally flips our understanding of genetics totally on its head. Let's look at cluster 1.
This is the largest group, actually. We can call it the classic genetic or late onset group.
The patients in this cluster have a very high polygenic risk score, meaning they were basically dealt a terrible hand of genetic cards at birth. In Alzheimer's, they are loaded with the infamous APOE4 gene.
And in Parkinson's, they have GBA1 mutations.
Okay, let's clearly define what those genes actually do so we really understand the mechanism.
Yeah, let's break it down. So in a healthy brain, a protein called APOE acts like a cellular trash collector. It binds to fats and clears out toxic beta amyloid buildup.
But the APOE4 variant is like a trash collector with a broken truck, right?
Exactly. It is highly inefficient, which allows toxic plaques to build up and literally smother your neurons.
And what about the Parkinson's gene?
Similarly, in Parkinson's, the GBA1 gene provides instructions for an enzyme that works in your cell's recycling centers, which are called lysosomes.
Lysosomes, got it.
Right. And when that GBA1 gene is mutated, the recycling center just shuts down. And a toxic protein called alpha-synuclein builds up.
Okay, so if you are in cluster 1, you have the broken trash trucks and the shutdown recycling centers. You basically have the ultimate genetic blueprint for neurodegeneration.
You'd think so, yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Despite having the absolute worst genetic risk, this group actually had the lowest mortality rates.
Yeah.
They had the lowest hospitalization rates.
Yeah.
And the mildest disease progression of any group in the entire study.
It completely defies traditional logic, doesn't it?
Totally. How does that even make sense?
It introduces this really vital biological concept called resilience.
But how does someone with a brain full of toxic protein tangles demonstrate resilience?
Because while they have a very high genetic predisposition for localized brain pathology, like those plaques and tangles, they largely lack systemic health issues.
Meaning the rest of their body is fine.
Exactly. Their prediagnostic health records show almost no severe metabolic dysfunction, no major cardiovascular disease. Their bodies are otherwise highly functional.
So this proves definitively that genetic risk is not strictly deterministic.
Absolutely not. Having the APOE4 gene does not mean dementia will quickly ravage your brain, provided the rest of your biological systems are healthy enough to compensate.
I really love that visual.
Yeah.
If you are listening, think about it like having the spark, but you don't have the dry kindling to start a massive fire.
That is a perfect analogy. But let's contrast that with cluster 2. This is the vascular-associated subtype.
Right, vascular meaning blood flow and plumbing.
Yes. And this group also has that same high genetic risk, so APOE4 in Alzheimer's, LRK2 mutations in Parkinson's. But unlike our resilient first group, cluster 2 is dominated by massive plumbing problems.
And the numbers here are crazy. I was looking at the Alzheimer's group for cluster 2. And an incredible 94% of the patients had essential hypertension.
Which is chronic high blood pressure.
94%. Almost every single person in that specific constellation had chronic high blood pressure well before their memory ever started failing.
And mechanistically, this perfectly illustrates what we call the mixed dementia construct.
Mixed dementia. Let's unfold that for the audience.
Sure. In cluster 2, you don't just have the genetic accumulation of toxic proteins, you are actively destroying the brain's physical infrastructure.
Because of the blood pressure.
Right. Think about high blood pressure. It creates this massive shear stress inside your delicate blood vessels. Over decades, this physical pounding damages the endothelial cells lining the vessels in your brain.
It essentially causes microbleeds and stiffening, right?
Exactly.
It's like having a bouncer at the door of your brain, which is the blood-brain barrier, and high blood pressure just beats the bouncer up every single day.
Precisely. The barrier becomes leaky. So when you combine genetic susceptibility, so the toxic proteins, with failing plumbing that lets systemic toxins into the brain environment, well, the vascular damage actively accelerates the neurodegeneration.
It just acts like pouring gasoline on that spark we talked about.
Exactly.
Okay, let's do a quick synthesis of what we've covered in these first two groups, just to keep it organized in everyone's mind.
Good idea.
So, path 1. Bad genes, but physically healthy overall, so their brain manages the decline slowly and gracefully. Path 2. Bad genes plus leaky blood vessels from chronic high blood pressure, leading to a much faster vascular-driven decline.
Right, two very different trajectories from similar genetics.
But we aren't just talking about physical plumbing here. We've seen how blood vessels accelerate decline, but the AI found something even more insidious, something that originates invisibly.
Yeah, this brings us to cluster 3.
Which proves that your mental health and physical neurodegeneration are deeply biologically intertwined.
Cluster 3 is the mental progression subtype. And I have to say, what the AI found in their medical history is incredibly sobering.
Why? What did their genetics look like compared to the others?
Well, their traditional genetic risk is actually much lower than the first two groups. But their pre-diagnostic health records, going back decades, are defined by high rates of clinical anxiety, severe depression, hypothyroidism, and chronic respiratory diseases.
And the physical trajectory for these patients is brutal.
Extremely fast decline.
In the Alzheimer's cohort, they show incredibly fast cognitive decline. We track this using something called MMSE scores, the mini mental state examination.
Which is a 30-point questionnaire doctors use to measure memory and cognition.
Right. And patients in cluster 3 see their MMSE scores plummet far faster than the genetic groups.
And we see the equivalent severity in the Parkinson's cohort, too. Patients in cluster 3 suffer severe early motor symptoms.
Like what kind of symptoms?
They experience physical tremors up to 3 years before their official clinical diagnosis. They suffer from high rates of freezing of gait where they literally feel like their feet are glued to the floor.
Oh, wow. That sounds terrifying.
It is. They also have terrible falls and severe REM sleep behavior disorders.
You know, I think society and even a lot of doctors tend to view depression and anxiety in these patients simply as a natural reaction to getting sick.
Right. Like, of course you're anxious, you're losing your memory.
Exactly. You're losing your independence. But the AI completely reframes this. Because it was tracking these records 20 years in the past, the anxiety was there long before the memory loss ever started.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it changes everything. This cluster strongly suggests that affective disorders and chronic stress aren't just symptoms, they are systemic inflammation pathways that actively drive neurodegeneration.
Independent of the classic Alzheimer's gene.
Completely independent.
But how does feeling anxious physically destroy a neuron? Like, step by step, what is the mechanism?
It comes down to chronic cortisol and neuroinflammation. When you suffer from chronic depression or severe anxiety, your body is in a prolonged state of fight or flight.
So you are constantly baiting your brain in stress hormones.
Right, specifically cortisol. And over years, this chronic stress, which is often paired with systemic issues like an underactive thyroid, turns the brain's immune cells, called glial cells, hyperactive.
Glial cells, those are supposed to protect the brain.
Right. They are. But under chronic stress, they get angry. They start attacking healthy tissue instead of protecting it. This neuroinflammatory environment literally degrades the neural networks.
It really makes you look at a history of chronic anxiety differently. Not just as a mental health struggle that you have to sort of grit your teeth through, but as a serious systemic risk factor for your brain's physical structure later in life.
It is a heavy realization, but an empowering one.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've covered the mind-body connection. But if we are talking about systemic drivers, we really have to talk about the most dangerous non-genetic pathway of all.
Oh, cluster 4.
Cluster 4, the metabolic danger zone. This is arguably the most terrifying, but also the most preventable constellation the AI found.
It is the metabolic-inflammatory subtype, and I want the listeners to really brace themselves for the statistics here because they are staggering.
Yeah, I was looking at the supplemental data for this group, and in the Alzheimer's cohort for cluster 4, there is a 97% prevalence of type 2 diabetes.
It's basically the whole group.
97%, practically the entire cluster, along with incredibly high rates of renal disorders, so kidney disease and obesity.
But the defining feature of cluster 4 isn't just the almost universal presence of diabetes, it's the paradox of their genetic profile.
This is literally the biggest twist in the whole study. For everyone listening, you have to hear this. This group actually has a lower genetic risk for Alzheimer's.
Yeah, they are physically depleted in the dangerous APOE4 gene we talked about earlier.
Instead, they have a massive enrichment of the protective APOE2 gene.
Right, so to go back to our earlier analogy, APOE2 is like having a massive fleet of ultra-efficient VIP trash collectors in your brain.
Highly protective against amyloid plaques.
Very protective.
They literally won the genetic lottery for brain health. And yet, despite those protective genes, patients in cluster 4 suffer high mortality, incredibly rapid symptom onset, and terrible hospitalization rates.
It really raises an important question about our fundamental understanding of dementia. I mean, how can someone with highly protective genes still suffer such a rapid, aggressive form of Alzheimer's?
The analogy I keep coming back to is building a house. Imagine you have a pristine, flawless blueprint for a home. That's your protective APOE2 genetics.
Okay, I like this.
If you build it right, the house should stand for 100 years without a single creak. But if you take that perfectly built house and you actively set it on fire through environmental factors, it's still going to burn down to the foundation.
And in this case, the fire is severe, unmanaged metabolic disease.
Exactly.
That is a brilliant way to frame what neurologists call the type 3 diabetes hypothesis.
Type 3 diabetes. Let's unpack every detail of that for the audience.
So this is the emerging idea that for a massive subset of patients, Alzheimer's is fundamentally a metabolic disease. Let's look at the actual mechanism here.
Okay, let's walk through it.
When you have severe type 2 diabetes, you develop systemic insulin resistance. Now, insulin is the biological key that unlocks the door of your cells to let glucose, which is sugar inside, for energy.
So in type 2 diabetes, those cellular locks basically get gunked up.
Exactly. And the brain is the biggest energy hog in the entire human body.
Yeah, doesn't it use an insane amount of energy for its size?
Oh, absolutely. The brain only accounts for about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes 20% of your body's energy.
That is wild.
So if that insulin resistance crosses into the brain, your neurons literally cannot take in glucose. They begin to starve.
Oh, wow. So they are just running completely out of fuel.
Right. And when a neuron starves, its internal machinery panics and breaks down. It stops clearing out waste. Proteins start misfolding into tau tangles. It triggers massive localized inflammation, and the neuron dies.
So this cluster proves that even with the best genetics in the world, chronic high blood sugar and kidney disease will systematically destroy your brain.
Yes, the fire burns down the house anyway.
Okay, let's do another quick synthesis for you listening as we just hit the 20-minute mark of all this research. We've now seen 4 paths.
Let's hear them.
Path 1, bad genes, good health overall, slow decline. Path 2, bad genes plus high blood pressure, leading to faster vascular decline.
Path 3 was the invisible inflammatory decline driven by chronic depression and anxiety.
Right. And path 4, good genes completely overridden by the biological fire of severe type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance.
It really puts the power back in your hands there, if you think about it.
It totally does. If metabolic health is this tightly linked to cognitive decline, then prioritizing your sleep, going for a walk, cutting back on processed sugars. It isn't just about weight management.
No, it is literal active dementia prevention.
But we have to look at the final group now, because it is the most extreme manifestation of all these systemic failures combined.
Cluster 5.
Yes, cluster 5 is the severe multisystem failure subtype, or the sensorimotor and cardiovascular associated cluster.
Demographically, this is the most male-dominated cluster in the entire study, right?
It is. Biologically, it is defined by extensive cardiovascular disease, early motor disorders, and the absolute highest 5-year mortality and hospitalization rates across the board.
In this group, multiple biological systems are essentially collapsing simultaneously.
Yeah, it's a total systemic fail.
And there was one very specific, honestly wildly surprising data point buried in the supplementary tables for this group that I just could not get over.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. In the CPRD Alzheimer's cohort for cluster 5, There was a 20% prevalence of late-stage syphilis.
Yeah, that caught a lot of people off guard.
When I read that, I honestly had to do a double take. It sounds like a medical anomaly from the 1800s.
It really does sound like something out of a Victorian medical journal, I know. But it actually perfectly illustrates the dark biological mechanism of cluster 5. Let's look at how syphilis actually works.
Yeah, let's explain the actual mechanism of that infection.
So the bacteria that causes it, Treponema pallidum, is a spirochete, which means it's shaped like a microscopic corkscrew.
Like it actually twists.
Yes, and it literally drills through human tissue. Late-stage or tertiary syphilis is notorious for causing neurosyphilis, where the bacteria successfully drills right into the central nervous system.
Which goes back to the blood-brain barrier we talked about in cluster 2, the bouncer at the door who is supposed to keep infections out.
Precisely. And in cluster 5, that bouncer isn't just beat up. The entire fortress wall has crumbled.
It's just totally gone.
Right. Cluster 5 represents a highly vulnerable multi-system phenotype. These are patients whose blood-brain barrier has been systematically obliterated over a lifetime.
Whether that damage comes from decades of severe cardiovascular disease, repetitive microstrokes, or untreated corkscrew bacteria like syphilis.
The physiological result is exactly the same. Once the barrier is breached, the brain is entirely exposed to systemic toxins and infections, leading to a rapid, catastrophic cognitive and physical decline.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? We've just walked through 5 wildly different biological paths that all lead to the exact same waiting room in a neurology clinic.
I think it means we have to completely stop viewing Alzheimer's and Parkinson's simply as mysterious brain diseases that happen in a vacuum.
They aren't isolated, they are systemic diseases.
Exactly. They have distinct vascular, metabolic, and psychiatric pathways that cross over between both conditions.
And importantly, it means the clinical trials of the future are going to fundamentally change, right?
Oh, absolutely. We won't just test a generic Alzheimer's drug anymore. We will test a metabolic insulin sensitizer for cluster 4 patients.
And maybe a vascular repair drug for cluster 2 patients.
That is the true promise of personalized medicine.
Which means your personal risk management has to be systemic too. Proactive screening for your metabolic health, keeping your blood pressure tightly on check, actively managing chronic depression or anxiety with your doctor. These aren't just general feel-good wellness tips anymore.
No, according to this AI, they are crucial, targeted forms of neurodegenerative risk management.
It is an incredible shift in perspective. But I want to leave everyone listening with a final thought to mull over, something that pushes past just dementia.
What's that?
Think about what we just discussed. The AI didn't use million-dollar brain scans or futuristic spinal taps to shatter Alzheimer's into 5 distinct diseases. It used decades of basic, boring doctor visits. Sprains, prescriptions, minor ailments, routine blood work.
Just the paper trail of everyday life.
Exactly. If a machine learning algorithm can look at a seemingly random string of billing codes spanning 30 years and accurately predict exactly how a single disease will biologically ravage your body based on your unique history, what does that mean for the rest of human disease?
Wow.
What other single diseases are we currently treating with a one-size-fits-all approach, like arthritis or migraines or autoimmune disorders? There are actually 5, 10, or 20 distinct conditions hiding in plain sight in our medical records.
That is a fascinating question.
We might not have a clean, precise X-ray for aging yet, but it turns out the mundane digital paper trail of your life might be the most revealing diagnostic tool we have ever created. What is your digital paper trail saying about your cognitive future right now?